The Gospel of John opens with a retelling of the Genesis creation story. And so to understand what John is saying, we have to go back to Genesis chapter 1. Bereshith, bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. V'haaretz hayatohu v'vohu. V'hoshech al paneh tehom. V'ruach Elohim maruchefet. O paneh hamayim. Vayomer Elohim yahi or. Vayahi or. Now, without going into over much detail for this particular lesson, these few sentences are packed full of symbolic and mythological imagery. And these 3 sentences not only manage to summarize the symbolic wisdom that existed in ancient Near Eastern mythology as a whole, but these 3 sentences can even be applied to modern scientific theories about how the universe began. The basic idea in both ancient mythology and in modern cosmology is that there was a time, for lack of a better word, before the universe as we know it came into being. And this was a time when chaos or nothingness ruled. Words like formless, void, abyss, water, ocean, sea, deep, these are all well-known mythological symbols for chaos, death, oblivion, or nothingness. And so when Genesis chapter 1 talks about the deep, the deep water, the abyss, it is talking about oblivion and death and nothingness. Now, in mythology, the younger gods of order and civilization eventually wage war against and defeat the older gods of chaos and oblivion. For instance, Marduk in Babylonian mythology defeats the sea goddess Tiamat. El in Canaanite mythology defeats the sea monster Yam. And the best known today probably is when Zeus defeats the chaos monsters called the Titans in Greek mythology. Now, in modern science, there is an explosion inside nothingness. It's called the Big Bang, and it sets all the forces of order, that is, the natural laws like gravity and heat and motion, into motion. In Genesis chapter 1, God speaks, and chaos is defeated in a flash of light. Now, no serious theologian today thinks that we are supposed to imagine God speaking in any literal sense. No, this is a symbolic statement. So high-level, formalized verbal communication, that is language or speech, is the most distinctively human phenomenon in this world. While other animals communicate, some even communicate through verbal signals, none of them have a verbal system as high functioning as human language. And without this unique ability to organize our thoughts and share those thoughts with other people, we humans would never have accomplished any of the things that we have accomplished. The largest brain in the universe is utterly useless if the thoughts inside that brain cannot be shared. Without language, human intellect is meaningless. Now, our human ability to communicate at this high a level has the power, literally, to move mountains and reshape our natural environment. And it's therefore not surprising that speech and writing have been associated with the gods and with divine intervention. And so speaking in Genesis 1 becomes the method that God uses to bring order out of chaos. It's a symbol, but like a lot of symbols, its power comes from its connection to reality, because words really do have this ability to bring order out of chaos. And as Christians, we believe that the ability to bring order out of chaos, peace out of violence, meaning out of tragedy, good out of evil, this ability comes from God. Now, one of the Greek words for word is logos, but it doesn't just mean word. And you might get a better sense of what the ancient Greeks were thinking when I tell you that our English word logic comes directly from the Greek word logos. Logos conveys a sense of logical or rational thought. the type of higher reasoning that sets humans apart from other animals. And ancient Greek philosophers and pre-Christian Jewish philosophers and then Christian philosophers and theologians have associated this idea of logos with the creator God. Now, remember back to those ancient stories I told you about. The myths taught that creation, the universe, had come out of chaos, order out of disorder. And this word that represents logical thought becomes a perfect way to speak about a creator who brings an orderly creation out of disorganized oblivion. But the philosophers and the theologians went even a step further. Logos does not just describe God. Logos is used to describe how God interacts with human beings and how God means for human beings to act. So when John rewrote the creation story in Greek at the beginning of his gospel, he didn't just mention God speaking and creating light. Instead, enake en hologas, kai hologas en prostantheon, kai theas en hologas. Hutos en ake prostantheon. Panta diautu egeneto, kai chorus autu egeneto udehen hogegonen. En autu zoe en, gai he zoe en tophos ton anthropon. Kai hologas sarx egeneto, gai eskenosen en hemen. In John, we are told that God is the Word, that is logic, rational thought, and that this logic or rational thought leaves the divine realm behind and becomes, lives, works, and dies as a human being named Jesus. The connection between humanity and God is rational thought. Also, in the Genesis creation story, we encounter the idea that Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam batzalmenu kidmuthenu. Vayeredu b'degath hamayim uva'of hashamayim uva'bahema uva'chal haaretz uva'chal haromesh al haaretz. Vayevra Elohim et Adam batzalmo b'tselem Elohim bara otho. So even before the Christian era, both Jewish and Greek philosophers started having a problem with the idea that humans physically resembled the all-powerful creator of all things. And so Jews and then later Christians began to interpret this image of God idea with the idea that we humans have been endowed with certain divine qualities. Most notably, you may have already guessed it, rational thought. So to this day, higher reasoning is believed to be the thing that most separates humans from other animals. For Christians, this higher reasoning is a divine gift, which brings with it many responsibilities, including stewardship or guardianship over what science might call less evolved forms of life. And again, logic, rational thought, higher reasoning, self-awareness, wisdom, whichever one of these terms you choose to use, this is the thing throughout the Bible and throughout Christian theology that most connects humanity to God. Indeed, logic and rational thought, or the logos, is in Christianity the part of God that becomes human. First, when God first creates humankind as a creature more rational than the rest of the creatures, and then ultimately when God literally does become a human being named Jesus Christ. All this means that wisdom and learning and education all have a very special place in Christianity. So going back to week 1 of this study, I mentioned the monks and the monastic orders as my inspiration for the Secret Keepers, this religious order that I wrote this book around. And in the conversation that week, a few people actually mentioned that they associate words like monasticism with groups of people that preserve knowledge. And this is not a coincidence. The educational system as it now exists owes its beginnings to clerics and religious orders. Universities were originally built as institutions to train clergymen, and that is not a coincidence. Religious leadership and education have always gone hand in hand. Back in the Jewish world, the scholars were the religious leaders. The scribes, the people who were trained to write in the temple schools. And a lot of people in churches today are surprised when I inform them that their pastors have master's degrees, but they do. Ordination, at least in most mainline denominations, requires master's level education, and that is not a coincidence. As Christians, we believe that rational thought, wisdom, learning is the human quality that connects us to God. And therefore, again, to go back to week 1 of this study, this is the thing, the human quality that allows us to follow the divine mandate to seek justice, mercy, and humility. Animals without higher reasoning have no sense of humility, no sense of mercy, no sense of justice. Without higher reasoning and the ability to learn and the ability to grow in wisdom, life is purely about survival, and survival is survival of the fittest. And this, incidentally, is why I personally think that scientific theories like evolution actually help us to fill out and understand Christianity better rather than threaten Christianity. Because Christian theology has always taught about this conflict within human beings between our God-given rational self and our animalistic, instinct-driven self. And it is our God-given rational self, the thing inside us that we cultivate through learning and through education, that allows us to overcome natural laws like survival of the fittest. Education is what allows us to have humility. Education is what allows us to see other people as worthy of God's mercy and God's justice. Education is what allows us to work with God in making this world better, or at least a little less terrible. There is this perception in our society that Christians are ignorant people who are trying to stay ignorant. And unfortunately, there are certain groups of Christians that do appear to be doing everything in their power to exacerbate this idea of Christians as people who would rather remain stuck in the past rather than move forward into the future. And that's unfortunate. There are other people who, for various reasons, try to downplay what we might call the academic side of Christian faith. They criticize the use of terms like theology. It's too heady a term for them. They promote books and studies that make a point of avoiding the big words, as if the big words are the new 4-letter words. And I find this trend troubling because it suggests that our faith is not worth our time and effort. But these same people will tell you what everyone knows to be true, that if you want to be good at a sport, you have to practice. If you want to get a good education, you have to study. If you want to get a good job, you have to work for it. But understanding ourselves, our faith, our place in this universe is something that shouldn't require effort. This is not the way that we as Christians are called to present ourselves to the world. We are not the uneducated. We are not the unlearned. We are not the ignorant. We may start that way, but let's face it, all people everywhere start as uneducated and ignorant. It is not where we are supposed to stay. And so I have written a book where the Christian leadership are also educators, scholars, people at the forefront of learning, education, and progress. We are called as a people of God to be always learning, always growing, always becoming more and better than who we are right now. And the way we do that is through education. First our own, and then others.